Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of AltMed. My name's Andrew Dowling. With me, as always, my co-host Mitch Kurtz. And back by popular demand, we've got a very special guest who has been on our podcast before. Absolutely got the view count up big time. I actually think it might have been our most viewed episode.
It was.
He's back for round two, and I think we're going to eclipse those numbers with today's episode. It is none other than Scott Blakey, the legend Shantibaba. Scott, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you very much for having us. Me.
And if you do like these podcasts, please remember to hit like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. All right, well, we'll dive in. We can skip over your origin story because we did it in the last episode. But Mitch and I were talking and we wanted to pick up really just unpacking a little bit more around your involvement in setting up the Greenhouse Seed Company in Amsterdam in the late 1980s and the ensuing, and I hope I've got this number right, is it 8 Cannabis Cup awards that followed in the next 10 years or so? I mean, how many?
When I'd left in 98, the last one I did there, I think it was around 30, 28, 29 Cannabis Cup. We gathered between us. I mean, I'm not really one of those guys that takes that as a accolade like everybody else does because I saw behind the scenes. But I suppose I think it was in that 20 to 30 cups. We'd won a lot, we did well in the early 90s.
But yeah, quite a bit of silverware there between. So the team was yourself, Neville Schoenmakers, and Arjan. So yeah, talk us through what was the first one that really caught everyone's attention? Because I know Widow, which we talked about on the last episode, that came later. But where did it sort of really all?
I suppose there was a guy called Todd, American guy who was living in Holland, and he used to frequent the greenhouse. He was good friends of both Arjan and I at that stage, and we got talking about this high time. Must have been 91, around 1991. We'd seen it. We'd seen it happening. There was High Times Cannabis Cup movement. They came in each year, and they had their own little event within there. And I think around, I suppose, Sam and Neville were already, and Rob Watson, they were already doing that stuff. And there was a few other coffee shops, Sensi and that doing it. And we got involved when we established the company around I think it was 1994, but we were working 2-3 years before that to get everything set up. But I remember the most interesting was when we won that year with Master Kush. I think it was just Master Kush, not Master Gun. In 94, 93, somewhere around there. I can't remember myself, but that was one of the first ones that I remember being a part of, and then after the Widow, the White Widow, and the White Rhino, White Shark, and so forth.
Well, there's a few of the genetics in your bank which predate that as well, including, I guess skunk #1, things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about how, I guess what would have been considered at the time quite a collaborative nature versus kind of maybe where you've expressed it, you feel it goes these days with a burgeoning cannabis industry globally, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, when it began, it was more like we were kind of, I don't know the best way to describe it, but I suppose we were refugees, cannabis refugees in Amsterdam, the mecca of sort of freedom with cannabis at that time. It wasn't legal, hasn't been legal. It's never been legal, in fact, and it's always been tolerated in coffee shops. When they have the material there, it's legal tender. So that's never changed, okay? And most people thought it was always legal there because they were quite liberated with it. But for people like myself coming from Australia, or Neville, or Rob Clark, he used to live across the road from the Tolstra, Dave Watson, there was all of the Dutch contingent, plus many transients, that came from America. I mean, I met Soma in the early 90s there, I suppose, or mid-90s. Met Todd McCormack. Everyone passed through there at some stage. Dennis Peroni came. We had, it was like a very everyone was doing their own thing. We all had our own grow rooms. That was all still black and it was all quiet. And we, sneak off in the night or the day or early morning to our rooms and do our thing. And then the afternoon, evening, we ended up, usually smoking a joint in a coffee shop or drinking a beer. And, guys like that would turn up. I was always talking with Rob Clark. He became a very good friend of mine. And of course, Neville and Ariane, we'd have a few beers and talk about different things. And everyone would show their things. And some guys, would come in and start to want to move to them. Like Soma, he wanted to move at that stage. He used to come in with his lavender skunks and various other things. And it was, there was a lot of extreme people who were really into cannabis and in their lines. And I suppose that's where no one was really competing. There were seed companies, there were coffee shops, but whoever had something good usually sold it. So we were always sort of quietly taking notes and improving, and it was like a peer group pressure improvement. You would just want to come to the table with the best stash in your thing. I'd always had Indian Sheriffs, and that used to make Rob Clark pretty happy. He photographed it all over his hash books and stuff, and all different hashes we used to make as well. So we were dry sieve in those days, and water hash was the early stuff, the bubble they call it still. It was just the embryo of really that liberated sense of sort of freedom of being cannabis breeders, users, growers, and not criminals for a change.
Yeah. Was it competitive? Was it competitive though? I can imagine if
it started to get competitive after we all realised where we were and what we had compared to the rest of the world, and that was very early, late '80s, early '90s. And then all of a sudden, coffee shops in Amsterdam started to take on that kind of. I mean, Aaron became a good business person. He still is to this day. I mean, there's a few guys, the DNA boys, Dutch Passion, Sensi said, they all, what I mean? They all sort of grew out of that moment in time. Not everyone had seed companies. Like Barney's was a coffee shop then, and then later they started to come into the thing and developed a seed company. And so it was the beginning. It was quiet competition, and however, it wasn't competition like, it was competition in a good way. It was competition where people wanted to do a better job, and they were taking notes from their peers rather than, sort of trying to sort of rationalize why they did it that way. And, it was much more like a university, I suppose, in that sense. Before we had the knowledge of what we had in our hands, we were all kind of friendly. I remember Neville and Ariane were not, as they weren't like myself with Dave Watson and Rob Clark. There was still some animosity for different things, but I mean, generally, it was a good time. It was a very relaxed time. I call it the golden years of.
Were there like, could you tell early on who were like the standout performers?
Sorry, it is Sunday and the bells are chiming for my village. I don't know if you can hear them, but I can't hear you. Say that again.
Were there any standout kind of people who you just knew from early on were better or more adept at growing or just had better product?
As a grower, when you look at someone's flowers with the eye of knowing what you're doing, it's very, very in 3 seconds, pretty much everything about the people, and how they treat their room and stuff. I mean, it's like reading tea leaves for me, I suppose. But yes, there's definitely characters, kind of a mentality for a very good grower. And usually they're pretty relaxed. They're very quiet. They're observing rather than sort of talking too much. And when they have some things that they need a hand with, they usually come and ask someone who they look up to, and it's all quietly done. You don't come in with guns blazing. That's usually the growers who are the commercial ones wanting to make the most in the quickest time and retire to Florida, something like that.
Yeah. Well, you've spoken previously, I think, about. I mean, you had your some of the strains at the coffee shop that were, 8-week cultivation cycles. And then you had, strains that were potentially closer to double that at 14 weeks. And, the amount of interest in that. I mean, commercially, you can understand a company these days saying, well, I don't want to go through that period of time for a cultivation cycle, but it might be a tale of, good things come to those who wait. Did you feel back then that it was very much more artisan and craft, in the sense that people were prepared to wait for really good stuff and to try and get their hands on it?
Yeah, by far. I mean, actually, they were real people doing the job they love by personal choice, rather than all of the incentives nowadays and all of these big business stuff. That's what's happened. It's just become kind of profit guided rather than patient guided, and we were on the first line of defense. We came out of our closets and we were, sitting with cancer victims in the coffee shops. They didn't know at that stage, but that was the only thing that was relieving them, and so we just kind of evolved, up until, I remember when Dennis Perrone came for that proposition 215 or 205 or whatever it was, and that started the whole thing. Yeah, and we had made White Rhino that year. That was the strongest one. We dedicated to him, and we won the cup with that. That was too strong. That was the moment I realised we're going just too much THC and missing a couple of other traits there. And it was successful for what it did. It used to make everybody have a whitey and fall down and
have a whitey.
And yeah, that's what they used to get off the train. They come straight down. They'd buy this White Rhino. They'd line up. They hadn't eaten properly. They probably travelled 20 hours or something. Take a couple of puffs, and you see them slowly start sweating. And then we had an actual protocol for that. So sugary tea, share outside, set them up right, and feed them some. So the staff would train for that. I suppose White Rhino safety kit we had,
what about
it?
What was the are you able to briefly touch on the origin story of that strain? Do you remember?
Oh, it was widowed with Afghan. It still is to this day. I just call it Medicine Man under the Mr. Nice label. But you asked about the kind of the difference in sort of the times and stuff, and that really. It was really a very simple recipe. We had in the old days, we would come up with a strain that people liked. We kept the mother. No one else had the mother. We cut clones and we flowered it. And that was, say, a 6 to 8 week strain. Just let's call it skunk one, okay? And that would be worth, say, 5,000 a kilo, and related to the amount of hours and weeks that you had to go in flowering. Then we had the other extreme, like a 3/4 sativa, which later on we called it Neville's Haze, which takes 14 weeks. And you have to be a particular type of grower because it's a completely different plant, much more closer to the equator, like a Thai or sort of structure. And so it's not heavy, dense buds, but it's a very airy, fluffy, very tall plant, not for Holland grow rooms most of the time. We had to train around the walls most of the time and left the indicas in the middle to flower 2 times while that one flowered once around the peripheral. So we had techniques to try to get this on the menu. The trouble was, when you paid, say, 5,000 for a kilo of a skunk, and double the time, you had to pay 10,000 to the grower. And that was extreme. Everyone wanted to get 10,000, I assure you. Not many did. They came in with their stuff, and it was very easy for the buyers at the greenhouse in that time to see everything in the village or everything on offer first, take it all, and reject the secondary stuff which went to other places. We offered a little bit more money, and so everyone was in that competition unknowingly to sell their wares there. And then if they had boasting rights once they sold it there and made their money. And it kind of gave an incentive to become a better grower in one respect. That's how I saw it anyway. And so we slowly put different things on the menu, which hopefully in the future the rest of the world will start to understand properly. that there's a lot of differences between a very cheap white wine and a good champagne, or you know, sort of a sparkling red, and then a Barolo. You know, you have to age things. You need time. The difference is the amount of work involved in the processes there, and the time. So, you know, eventually, I think this new wave, this second wave that we're getting at the moment, where people have been flooded with all of these skunks and pushers and stuff, they're kind of now starting to look around for not only flavor and density and the value for money, but you know, there are effects that come in with hybridizing sort of, you know, fast flowering and slow flowering plants, you know, let's call it like that. And you know, I think Super Silver Haze or Mango Haze, these are 50/50s, and they're very practical. They're 9 to 11 weeks, so they're almost in the commercial range. If you're able to do them in a greenhouse or outdoor, you'll have a very commercial plant and a very good weight. So it won't be anything like what it was when we first started, for example. But to do them indoors, sometimes they're not practical, so you have to use the climatic conditions better.
So interestingly, when you talk about Super Silver Haze and Mango Haze, now they're pretty related plants, aren't they? And I wanted to touch on kind of tying in what we were talking about before, you know, I guess grower signatures or breeder signatures. You know, I think it sounds like there's that if you're dealing with people who are kind of a little bit competitive and using, let's not say the same genetics, but some of the stuff would be, you know, you're trading seeds, things like that. I imagine that each person, you know, growing would end up having a like almost like a style or a signature that they would kind of go for. Did you see that kind of develop, and how does that play in, for example, in the Super Silver Haze versus Mango Haze example?
Okay, it's a really interesting question. The interesting question is because it was actually Neville and myself in that. I went more for the Mango Haze line, what they called a parallel ancestry. So I believe is that Haze a skunk, the skunk one, that was one plant, and then we went to the Haze C and Northern Light 5, and that was another plant, and that made Mango Haze. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember everything in that. And then the Haze skunk, the Haze C skunk, plus the Haze C Northern Lights. So there's a difference in one male in the line, the back line. So the grandparents basically, and that went into Super Silver Haze. So the very slight difference, the combination of A and C haze in the ancestry of Mango Haze versus just C haze made it was Neville preferred that kind of selection, and I preferred always the combination of males that what the structure of the plant looked like. It's very difficult to explain that thing without having two different kind of flowers in front of me that I could show you the structure. But say a very heavy flower cluster, groups of flower that grows as a cluster. It was Neville preferred that kind of structure, whereas I preferred a very clear flower, and then the cluster would be more kind of not so compacted and on top of each other, but a little bit like spaced out a bit more. So I suppose the mango, you can tell the difference. He's got a very spicy, menthol, earthy, truffly flavor, where I've got a very euphoric pineapple, delicious sort of fruit salad plant kind of, you know, the more exotic kind of subtle flavors and fruitness in that versus spice. So they were our natural selections. I mean, we didn't have laboratories in those days. This is what we just selected because we preferred the smoke. We used to cut the plant, hang it up for 3 months, and then go and meet, you know, once a week and sort of smoke each other's plant. And that's how we selected. That's how I did the Mango Haze, for example, and that's how he originally. We sat for hours doing maybe 1,000. We flowered out 1,000 haze seeds in the same S generation, and selected two, basically.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So
I think that's interesting to hear because, most times it seems like, at least in breeding, people just say, oh, this is Northern Lights genetics, for example, or this is whatever. But it sounds like there's, within, if you say it's haze genetics, but it sounds like you've got several different plants that are the genus of different, later strains. So if you say it's haze origins, sure, it's haze origins, but you're saying that there's actually different plants within the haze range that have different expressions that could create two different outcomes totally.
Well, Mitch, there was no book of rules when I was starting this. Haze was loose term used. We created that name. In fact, not some Americans had used it, but when we started to do the breeding, we called something Haze A and Haze C, or you know what I mean, or a female haze, and then we combined it. So we started to use those generic, those common names, let's say, and then when people bought seed, they continued to use those names, but they start to go away from what the original selection was, because they're making their own selection for their own traits, which after 3 or 4 generations, pretty much different completely, and it's yours. And that's still to this day, if you work with regular seed, not feminized seed and just spraying it, but if you've got real males and real females in the ancestry of plants, we also worked on pedigree breeding. When like a dog show, when you win a cup for that. So everything that we did, or Neville started it and then we continued it, everything was a winner. So we only bred with winners to winners in those lines of using those parent plants. So I call that pedigree breeding, basically, and we carried that through. Most people now, they get a clone from America, they bring it over to Holland, they spray it, they make feminized seed from it, or they're flowering feminized, whatever. But some people try to cross it with another male that was that, but the actual work takes a minimum 2 years to start and be happy with, if you don't make any mistakes. So it's not, fast food culture demands something changing every 3 months, and that's why you see all these like candy colored coded names coming on the market so quickly. And I've got no idea. I don't know what they mean most of the time. I ask people, do you know the origin? Where does actually, which country did the seed originate from? So I can understand if it's a short, compact plant or a very fluffy, because now the meaning's just completely lost. Names mean nothing anymore. Only the chemotype or the terpene profile will mean something nowadays, because then you can prove what you're looking at. You know what I mean? But the name is completely irrelevant.
So you're saying back in the day, it wasn't, well, I mean, chemotype still would have been if you had the lab test, but basically you could identify what you could expect to experience if you got, let's say, a haze or a widow or a kush.
Once you've done, once you, as the person doing that particular cross with that particular male and female and doing the selection and going through and selecting out things, not everything worked out, of course, but when it did, it was quite exciting, because you think you know what's going to happen, but like everything, if you have a wife and you think you know what the kid's going to look like, do you ever visualize that? It's a very difficult 3-dimensional concept in your brain to have to kind of come up with that. You can do it now with computer AIs, or you blend you know what I mean? You can maybe 70% mum and dad, But in those days, you had to predict as best, and then you had to test the S1C and check it out, because it wasn't good enough, even if you thought that,
But you said you used to kind of have this technique where you would kind of take a bit of flour from each, roll them into a mixed joint, and get a vibe of what was to come.
That's how we developed an idea of what to go to. You know what I mean? Like, if you had a pure Northern Lights and you had a pure haze and you had a widow, you could do, say, 50% widow, 25% of the other two, and have a rough idea maybe how that would combine. It's very rough guide, but I used that many times as a thing, because I had the pure varieties. You know what I mean? So just let's go back one step further. If you had an Afghan plant from the Hindu Kush area, and then you had a Kerala plant from India, and you grew them out and you made a selection and you wanted to actually combine them. That is a very good technique to understand the kind of flavors and that are potentially inside that and the effect that it creates. So yes, I think it was a bit hippie science, but it was much more precise with having no knowledge to machinery, technology at that stage.
Well, interestingly, like when you say you planted out, say, 1,000 seeds to choose from, how did you choose the winner? Like, because even if you say there was no lab test then and you had to smoke every plant, even if you smoked one a day, that would be 3 years worth of, and I imagine maybe you smoked it a bit quicker. But how did, like, can you explain, like, how did you select?
Yes, I'm lucky I have morning and night where I can actually do two in one day. And yes, it's a very taxing problem I had. And but I had a million people lining up to volunteer for that taxing problem. I spread it around, tell you the truth, because as good as anyone thinks they are, you don't know what's going to be popular amongst your peers. And when like I remember making a piece of hash one time. I think I won the cup with the Shantibaba hash many years ago, 97, 98, and something around that. And I made this exceptional piece of dried sieve hash. And I thought, I took it to Neville as powder and separately to Rob Clark, to Dave Watson, a few others, the guy, the Eagle Bill, a lot of guys that are no longer alive anymore, and of course Howard and a few people. Separately, I didn't say anything to anyone, and they all rang me up and asked me if I had any more. And so I thought, I wanted something there, because this is the so-called heads of state at that time, and they were all, they were all privately saying, "Oh, that must have been worthwhile. I'm going to call him and ask him."
Yeah.
So I allowed barometers of different ways. You have to just sort of gauge it in a completely different way without telling people most of the time you're experimenting on them or they're the guinea pig. But I mean, in those days, it wasn't, you didn't really have any stigmas attached, because everyone in Amsterdam knew they were there for cannabis. So you could just go up and say, "What do you think of this?" And you get a pretty good critical evaluation, and not in a negative way. I mean, some people were jealous, but then they just asked for more.
But then the actual making it available to the people. So I think you've described this to me before, but I guess when people came to that coffee shop, there were limits, right, on the amount that somebody could actually take with
5
them.
grams.
5 grams. Okay. And did you feel like,
well, in the early days, not, but I mean, that slowly, when we had to separate alcohol to cannabis, and then the rules started coming in the last 20 years. So.
Right. But was it the case that people would come in, and would there be like I guess what surprises me is just comparing the current model where you have cannabis companies operating in medical markets, like the one that, that is in Australia and New Zealand. There's no coffee shop. There's no sense of community, in the sense of, hey, here's a new product. Please come and try it. And if you like it, you can, purchase some and take it. I'm just interested in that何aspect. Did you have, premiere nights at the coffee shop where you would unveil a new strain? Like, what was the kind of community aspect of it like?
Yeah, actually, yes, we had that. I remember distinctly, CBD crew did that, invited people from all over to one of the clubs in 2009 or 12 to release and to get everyone testing CBD. But further back than that, we basically, when we've been working for a while. For example, when we started the greenhouse seed, we come up with a new variety. We have to flower it. We had to cut clones of it. We had to take it to different single mothers we'd set up grow rooms, and the logistics of making stock without having the green light, it was unbelievable. I mean, I did kilometers on my bike. I'm moving 1 kilo here and 2 you know, I mean, it was a really, they should be proud of themselves for getting away with that sort of, that bumbling time of, and having so many things on the menu. It was great. Now that unfortunately gone backwards, because if they don't have the real super silver on, they sell something else to a tourist and they don't really care most of the time. And I find that sort of de-evolving at the moment. But yeah, there was a big sense of community. The 90s, there still is amongst the older guys, the ones that are 45 or above, and you know, you can still have a handshake and meet people a year later and do what you said you're going to do. But unfortunately, that was not good enough for making it into an industry either. You know, we needed the hand of the corporate kind of people, the corporate thinking people. I mean, I follow a lot of guys now and I read their stuff, but you know, you've got to have a good team. You got to have people that understand what they're doing and they're professional at what they're doing, and they understand what they're doing. You know what I mean? Some guys who are in the office who are evaluating marijuana sales to a doctor based on the amount of turnover is not really relevant, unfortunately, to the patient.
Yeah.
Most of the time. Unless they're a recreational patient hiding behind the medical license, which I'm sure there's probably the odd one, or 100,000 or something. But you know, those things are irrelevant, because actually what helps people and what's less toxic and everything would be a great solution for most people, you know, and getting off pharmaceutical, no matter what strains you like or what the doctor's prescribing. Personally, I think that Australia, unfortunately, has probably never really experienced the hashish kind of state of mind, and that's an amazing thing. I learned a lot in traveling Asia and how to make it in Holland and all of those places, and it's a very much better for many people rather than smoking chlorophyll and resin. So there is a very big different effect. And 80% of the world used to be hashish. It was maybe 20% was just marijuana. It was just the new countries, Australia, Canada, America, England. They were demanding more marijuana. But before that, traditionally, it was nearly all hashish coming from Morocco and India and Nepal and so forth.
Oh.
Was it single strain hashish, or was it like kind
of? No, not then. It was landrace, or I call it family race. You know, families that have been growing their own seed, letting it seed up, separating the seed, because what you do when you grow a seed plant is you have two products. You break the seed out, clean the seed out, and then you make the hashish from it, because you can't smoke the marijuana. It's too destroyed. However, seed plants make good hashish, or outdoor plants make better hashish than indoor plants, in my opinion. They're just more weathered, a different sort of structure to the head and the neck of the resin glands, that it kind of really works well in outdoor stuff. So especially if you can cure it, you know. But that's another podcast one another day on hash making. But actually, I mean, for guys like myself, to have a volume to go through to make a very small amount of hashish, you understand the crop very well, and you understand the average effect. So it's more a medical thing if you think about it, because what you're doing is, instead of having single plant, you're using that whole field. You're getting all the terpenes that are possible in that generation. You're getting all the cannabinoids that are possible, and you're concentrating them down, taking away the green. And then you can either choose to press it or mix it with a fat, and you actually get a better all-round effect of that strain if it was growing traditionally how it was in the old days. Now what we think we're smart as, we've taken seeds back to these countries and only females, and now you slowly reduce the land races and you don't have the seed production there anymore. And because people see the amount of flowers you grow, and then they're becoming commercial, and all of a sudden you think you're helping and you're actually fucking yourself, basically. Sorry, excuse me, but you know, it's very difficult to know that balancing line where too much is ruining it.
But I'd imagine a lot of hash these days is not single, let's say, grow hash, as opposed to just the entrails of a bunch of different strains. So instead of getting that kind of like, let's say, single malt experience where you take the batch of that brew and put it all together, you're probably getting something more like a blend of different, whiskeys. Now, there's an argument to say that a blend is more balanced, let's say, in the whiskey analogy. But on the other hand, a lot of people like the characteristics of the single malt, the kind of the things that make it a little bit different. And I say this as a raging whiskey alcoholic, so I'm well qualified to say.
I appreciate that, Mitch, but I can understand. Actually, nowadays there's more single strain hashes coming out because now we can have the opportunity, the legality to cut a clone and make it. I did it, for example, when I first did the CBD stuff. I did 300,000 clones outside in Colorado of a single strain. No one had ever done that before, especially not for hemp, right? But I wanted to make sure that everything you grew was identical. That way I could make identical crude, and that way I could do distillate, and only from one strain. It had over 41 different terpenes on it when I'd made that extract originally, so when we'd had it done at the University of Colorado. So you start to open up a Pandora's box when you're able to test things. So I think nowadays it's more possible to get single malt cannabis, single cannabis, or let's say, I mean, there's always a combination, but you can definitely identify that would be Neville Hayes hash if you made a hash out of it. It would be outstanding. You'd probably be the most favorite guy in the block, and and 20 minutes later you wouldn't have anything left. And
if you had to choose your top 5 strains, what would they be?
I've been wondering this as well.
Well, I mean, it's a very difficult question because some days I wake up, I'm pissed off and I want to drink a tequila. Other days I wake up and, well, actually not wake up, and later on in the day. Other days I would like to drink a red wine and over a meal and not have that. I don't want to get, or sometimes you drink 3 or 4 glasses of rosé in a barbecue. I don't know what you feel like that day, but if I had to put, better question might be, if I was stuck on a desert island and I only had the choice of 5 seeds, what would that be? I would say Mango Haze, definitely. It's just for me, it's a outstanding strain with flavor. Inside that seed batch, you'll find something for everybody, right? Neville's Haze is up there. It's probably the champagne of the strains, of all of the strains in the industry. Then I would have to do one Widow hybrid. I'd probably go for Shark. I would say for me it's a really interesting one. It's just skunk with Widow, but it's got something I like. And then I suppose you would have to have. I would go for the original Master Kush, that flower that we had in '94 was it. It's meant to be an indica, but it flowered a bit more like a sativa, and it had a very artistic high. I was exceptionally creative with this strain, so it was a personal favorite. And one last one, I suppose, I don't know, something with 3/4 indica and 25% sativa. One of maybe probably the Cure, something that we have like that.
I thought you were going to say White Rhino, just purely because you're stuck on a desert island and you've got nothing to do, so you just want to sleep.
I think from the Shark I could get something very close to going to, because the difference between the Shark and the Rhino was Afghani Widow or Skunk Widow. So
thereabouts.
I already thought, actually, what would be the best blend nowadays in medical terms would be a pure indica and a pure sativa, and then having the blend to do what you want in between. So I'd probably have 2 pure strains, and then I would be able to make everything myself again. Even I'd have plenty of time to do it as well.
What were some of the other noteworthy kind of stories you had around families that you met that were, you know, where you got some of those land races from originally? You told us the widow one, white widow one last time.
Yeah. There was always anything in particular. I mean,
well, sometimes I'm still a bit hairy on which exactly were just yours, which were, you know, a combination of you and Neville, which were just Neville. Even if you had some,
pretty much they've all been mixed over the years now, because Neville's older than me by 8 or 10 years, 8 years I think, and then he was also in the seed company business and doing that in Amsterdam 2 or 3 years before I got there. So he'd already done a kind of. I'd had some rough things that I come with, but backseed, let's call it, but I hadn't worked on it properly. It was only in Amsterdam that we started to kind of work on. We didn't even have the same rooms together. We worked on stuff separately, and then we would come together and show each other, or I'd go to his place, or he'd come up to the farm, and so we were parallel working together until obviously we started the Mr. Nice concern in '98, and then he gave me 4 strains to work on, and I did 8 of mine, and that's how we started that thing. So, but listen, there's other guys in this industry. Breeder Steve came up with grapefruit and sweet tooth. He was living in Lugano too. We used to check. We were very good friends, and he's a lovely guy. Who else is Simon from Serious Seed? I'm still very good friends with. He's always been doing his thing. THC boys, good friends with Ravi from Sensi Seed. He's gone back into work for Sensi. We talk pretty well. I talk pretty much with everyone, and they've all got a kind of thing that they like. You know, it's whether it's to a leaning towards a skunk or leaning toward a kush or Soma, for example. He's got a very fruity palate, and he had some heavy hitting, very compact flower when he first came to Amsterdam. You know, it's the characteristics of what makes you tick, you know, and you kind of.
But I like this. I just personally like the stories when you know that you talk about when you were there, you know, and you found something with the family and you follow them up on the motorbike, that kind of story.
Like, oh yeah, but that was more in my travels in India and stuff, and when the widow and the Corella and when we went to South America. Yeah, I mean, I went to a lot of the areas. I mean, I'm now an old man, so a little bit hazy on some of those early rides around different areas, but I covered loads of kilometers on roads I probably couldn't find again. Smoked chillums in the temples, you know, because that was legal. Even to this day, if you go and smoke a chillum in the temple, you'll find, and then you would find someone who would know someone, which led you to a chapati and a dal together, and then 2 days later you meet someone and pull out a paper bag full of little buds in a farmland, and I mean, a lot of these sort of amazing episodes, riding around with a hammock, a block of hash, a girlfriend, and my no road being the wrong road. You know, that was my philosophy in those days. So I don't remember everything. I didn't write a diary like I probably should have, but a lot of strains started from those sort of things, you know. And when we had a room in Amsterdam with, we had 12 or 18 pollen-proof tents we made in the early 90s already with the pollen-proof material. We were able to do 18 different males at the same time. I mean, we were really ahead of the game in the way we put it all together. And it was a great time because there were no rule books. You just wrote it.
But so the other guys do the same thing?
Sorry,
were all the other guys doing the same thing? You know, traveling to India or
yeah, a lot of them. You know, the guys from the Flying Dutchman, Eddie, and he was a good traveler. He was a lovely guy. All the Dutch traveled everywhere. They also had their sources. No one. I mean, I don't remember anyone saying that mine's better than yours. It was never really that. We would share things. You know, in that batch, you might find something that would be like that. You know, and So I only trusted people who thought had integrity. I didn't really work too much on other people's seed, but I would like Neville, for example, I trusted. There's another American I worked with, Dave, a very young guy then. He came in with some really interesting hybrids at that stage in the early 90s, and we went along on with them. One or two of them made strains like Spice. Now, it was originally made from some Hawaiian stuff that he'd been working on, and he knew where the roots had come from. But we're as good as we're just like any agricultural industry, mate. We climb on the backs of who came before us, and we do our best to continue it on, and hopefully good people climb on our backs. But at the moment, it looks a little bit too commercial, a little bit too profit driven, a little bit too shareholding kind of things going on in our industry before they're walking. Then they still haven't, the big companies unfortunately have hemorrhaged huge volumes of money that I don't even have that understanding why they hemorrhage that in that situation, because I know with a smaller group of people and less big wages and less, sort of being an empty barrel, you don't need to make noise. You can just get on with the job and do a good job. It's the same energy you're putting into all of this to do a good job or a bad job, and you got a good result or a bad result is a difference. But I'm quite surprised that the industry took such a road. But I could see that it was going to happen when it started in Canada, and everyone got sucked in. I had people ringing up saying they're selling part of their company or doing that. And I just said, if you're going to resist, stay away from all that stuff, because, do what you're good at,
Yeah.
Most of these guys they were promises, and some of them have been really badly burned. Others have probably made money if they knew how to navigate that kind of industry. I just usually get burned from doing things that I don't understand. So
it would seem, looking at Canada, that for every person that has made some money, either as a business owner or as an investor, there's at least 20 that haven't. It's been an unmitigated disaster in so many cases, which is really disappointing for the rest of the world. I know you're based in Europe, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on how Europe is traveling in this respect. I mean, I can't necessarily see it going down the same path as Canada, but you still don't have really widespread access to THC flower. What's your take on how everything's moving over there? Is it slow because it's the EU and there needs to be kind of a will of many states that make up Europe, or what do you see as the problem?
It's very frustrating, Andrew. I've been doing it for decades, and now everything has got in line, synchronized a little bit. There's still, unfortunately, the regulatory side of it, for some reason, whether it's to direct their profit margins or to make sure the taxes are done, or the control of the product, or who's making it and what's in it. They're now using all of these pharmaceutical approaches to an industry that still to this day, you can go to Amsterdam and buy some unregulated flower in a shop that's not legal, but it's legal there. Well, you're not breaking any rule. So there's a big disparity between the what's completely allowed and what's completely not allowed, and it's sort of merging all together and basically confusing every country, because Spain's gone backwards with their, everyone was growing down there for the last 10 years, and now all of a sudden they're all running to different other countries now. I'm based in Switzerland now, and I like the Swiss approach. It might be slower. Everyone's waiting for Germany, obviously, and I think when Germany makes a series of rules, whether it's be recreational or medical and recreational, because medical's defining the market at the moment. You guys are doing better in Australia with the TGA, as much as it's not fulfilled in every way. It's doing at least it's made some rules that you're allowed to now read abide by and work with.
Yeah.
The European community, America's gone, is terrible. I mean, that should have been the first one to open up the doors. Instead, they're imploding because now the price of pot, the quality is unbelievably high that no one even looks at outdoor pot after time. It's only made for extraction. In years ago, I mean, flour from outdoor was flour. You know, it was dope. Now you can't. You're lucky to get $2,000 a kilo for the top range of flour. Whereas maybe that's double over in Europe in the coffee shops for the wholesale. I'm talking about the wholesale markets, you know, and so the producers to the things. So it really changes. It's gone backwards in some countries and forwards in others. And me personally, I'm not sure why, because it's pretty easy to just make a set of rules that the government would be very economic from. It would be good for the people who are growing. I think Australia, South Africa, you know, maybe Canada in some of their ways have got that already, that protocol written down as SOP, and you know, and they're working. But I think there needs to be just one set of rules worldwide and not having all of these differences all the time. Just make it like an agricultural product. However, you see in America, you're allowed different tolerances. In Europe, you're allowed a lot less. It's much more traditional. It's much more controlled. There's too many countries, you know, there's 20 odd countries that are all, so they're all having to adjust. And, you know, you got to please a lot of different cultures at the same time and different legal systems. So it's much slower. It's very frustrating. I think we're pretty close to getting there, but I'm happy. I would never in a blue moon thought that I'd be having a farm in America and exporting to Australia 20 years ago. No. If you told me that, I would have laughed quite, you know, probably a six-pack.
Wow.
So, but now it's the case, and you know what to do. Europe's falling behind. America's falling behind. I think if Australia really is very smart about what they're doing, and they're able to overcome a few sort of obstacles and maybe pull the industry together in a good way, with a good quality way, and not focusing so much on, you know, sort of competing with each other to make more money. There's enough money in it for everybody, I'm sure. It's just that if you go in there over exceeding yourself with financial commitments, you're going to start under pressure. And I always said that just grow easy and to the orders, you know what I mean? And the orders start coming in that. But most people go in there with guns firing, and they want to build a bigger and better facility, and they don't even have a customer yet, you know what I mean? So
yeah, definitely seen that in Australia.
I've been in a long time. So I just seen and made all the mistakes already, I think. Yeah. Most of them anyway. But I'm happy to see you guys who obviously have reached over a podcast, so you must be doing something right.
Yeah, there is
100 podcasts. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's business 101. You know, maybe wait for a bit more demand before you increase supply. Anyway, it's
grow with the plant.
Yeah, grow with the plant, indeed.
You know, and I should, but don't get me wrong. I was just in Berlin at the ICBC, and you know, it was good to see that there's a lot of countries taking it seriously. There are a lot of different characters in this industry. I've had the most strange people in my life from this industry, I assure you. However, I have never really had the other strange side of people, you know, the suited up side, and that, or the bankers, or the, you know, the guys doing the credit cards, and that's kind of necessary evil, but it needs to be done with a bit of heart. So it has to come in and merge a little bit more sort of in a synchronized way. I think if that was able to happen, I mean, it should be a really interesting next few years, you know.
Amazing. Well, yeah, Mitch, sorry, I saw you about to ask.
I think that's good. I mean, I'd like to get a prediction on what you see. Do you think, in terms, just as a final kind of closing out note, What do you think we'll get there in Australia in terms of recreational?
Mm. You know, you guys have been there, what, 3 or 4 years now in kind of getting your fingers
in and around.
Yeah, you're in and around, and you're working with a lot of characters there, and you kind of got your finger on the pulse. So the thing is, I think Australia has the potential, very much so, if they continue along the way of treating it to help the little guy as well as the medium guy and the big guy equally. I'm pissed off that I'm a little bit old and that I came 40 years later when I see a stand for the Australian government, the Victorian government, or the New Zealand government at a show now. It kind of made me pretty happy in a very depressed way, because I feel like they've abandoned me and they crucified me along the journey as soon as anything went wrong. And now they're, sort of.
Are you saying that the Australian government in the early 80s didn't take you on a bit of a roadshow to tour Mullumbimby madness abroad?
Yeah. Well, they allowed everything that they didn't know what was happening to, and we had big borders. Like, let's just say that now I'm very proud, and I really do hope they blend that, Mitch. If you're asking for the prediction, I think that I don't know, there's 25 million people in Australia. I think maybe possible you got about 3 million, 5 million smokers or users of cannabis potentially. I think it's going to go higher for sure. I think you're at the beginning of a good growth. Hope alcohol industry doesn't get angry at you, because that might take a dive a little bit or just stabilize for a period. I saw that. We've seen that in Europe already. So it's not like I'm predicting this. It's just something that we've lived through a bit. They maybe even those industries merge in some way, because in a way they're kind of very similar, and kind of making a better place for Australian growers, for Australian products to be used by Australian patients. That would, I would like, at least 80% of the market to be like that for Australians in the end, because that's what it should be for every country. You can always bring in boutique stuff and special new innovative products and allow that 20%, but hopefully your market will be for you. But I mean, generally the Australian growers, the Australian producers, and so forth. And I think you've got the potential. I don't think anyone's there yet. I don't think the German medical market's anywhere near it. I don't think anyone. But with a little bit of guidance from, sort of centennials like myself, we'll be fine to help you. And it would be a pleasure to make sure some of these strains maybe get a Guernsey as well, because that would be their heirlooms now. 30, 40 years ago, they were just the beginning. Now they're sort of legacy. So, not everyone wants them, but some people who use them will always want them. For sure.
I think there is a lot of interest and demand still for the legendary strains of yesteryear. But just listening to you now,
vintage is back in.
Yeah, vintage is back in. I think we need to set up a meeting between Scott and Albo, Mitch, just to maybe have a few samples, just get them all changed.
Well, yeah, we can. I mean, we've got 3 members in the upper house now, so maybe you'll listen. Actually,
5 actually across WA, New South Wales, and Victoria. So 5 legalized cannabis members in
the political arena.
Yeah, in Australia. So, but we need changes to Commonwealth laws in relation to legalization. So, yeah, until we have that federal reform, it's still just sitting on the horizon for now.
So may I ask you a question, because I heard it just recently. There was a vote just recently in Australia to decriminalise the amount of plants that a person's allowed to use, or?
Well, in what happened in the ACT, in 2019 they passed laws that effectively allow people a home grow amnesty. It is capped. So I think per person, you can have 2 plants, and per household 4 plants.
Right.
And it makes sense that this happened in the ACT because that's where all the federal politicians work. And yeah, exactly. After a heated debate in the chamber, just head home and light one up. But no, they've passed that law, and lo and behold, and I was really shocked to see this, but the sky didn't fall in when that happened. So turns out that maybe, just maybe, in the other states, we could see a similar lead being followed. But the unfortunate reality is that the Commonwealth government could at any time veto those laws, but they haven't done so, and I think they're here to stay. So yeah, ACT leading the way in terms of progressive laws in Australia.
They've always managed to have laws that allowed them to function normally in that kind of very strange area of government and of Australia.
Firecrackers, pornography.
Yeah, it's always been one of those places. It would be great if they're able to manifest that all around the country, and everyone's allowed to do that. But at least growing a few plants now, you're not going to jail for or anything like that. I mean,
what's the policy on consumption of those plants, though, Andrew?
Well, it's not illegal to consume. It's only illegal to possess in states where it's criminalized, and then it depends on the quantity that you're possessing. So if it's a commercial trafficable quantity, that's obviously taken a lot more seriously than 1 or 2.
You can't say that I had a good grow.
Yeah, exactly. But look,
but a Scott personal quantity might be somebody else's commercial quantity.
I know, and they did codify into the legislation exactly what those limits are. But I would be, if in a hypothetical scenario, if Scott were my client, I'd be asking for some leniency from the bench on the basis of what Scott does for a living.
I, as much as you can laugh at all of those things, the funny thing is, I always thought I every year I've grown more than I'll ever be able to use, and I never have once.
Exactly.
Sounds like a failure at the moment.
Yeah. Grow with the plant. All right. Well,
we actually say proof is in the seed.
Proof is
yeah. As well as more plants, less people, but that one's probably a bit more sort of confrontational. But
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we might wrap it up there, but we always are very grateful for your time and your insights, Scott. You're a journeyman that I think still writing a few more chapters as we speak, as we go through this very dynamic period throughout the world of seeing maybe some of these vintage strains come back in vogue. But yeah, always a pleasure, mate, and thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having me. Wish you all.
Thanks, Scott.
All right. Until we do it again, take care.
Number 3. See you.
Bye.